Hi there, and welcome to Tutorials for My Mom. These tutorials, I'm making them for my mom, but if you're not my mom, you can still watch and enjoy them anyway. This first one we're doing is how to make a gradient in Photoshop. Gradients are very nice. It's a smooth transition from one color to another. It can help your design add a little pop to it, add a little flair, and it is a very helpful tool. Photoshop is great at it. So this is the basics on how to make a gradient. Here we have our new blank project. It's a blank canvas here. We just have our one layer, a lock background layer. We'll leave that as it is. We're going to click down here to create a new layer. Now we just have our blank layer 1. And that's what we're going to be using to create the gradient. So let's make sure we have that layer selected. And if you look down here at your toolbar on the left, you'll see the gradient tool. Now, if you don't see that, it might be hiding behind the paint bucket tool. So if you see this instead, you can hold there and unselect on the gradient tool. Unclick. So now we have the gradient tool. Depending on your workspace, the gradient tool might also be hiding down here under these three dots. So if you select that, you just got to look for that tool that has the gradient there, the black to white gradient. And if you click that, we will have it selected. So now for a couple quick basics of the gradient tool. Up here you see we have our light blue to purple. This is one of Photoshop's pre-made gradients. They have a bunch in here for you. Under basics, see black to white, they have a bunch of these blue ones here and all sorts of colors. This is one of their purple ones. So we'll just use this to start to test a couple things out. To the right of the color here, you'll see these 5 boxes, and these are the different types of gradients you can create. So it's a couple different looks to the gradient that will all use these same colors. In this first one, we'll select that. It's called the linear gradient. So with this gradient, you have a start point and an end point. And you just create that by clicking and dragging the mouse. And when you have your end point that you want, you'll just unclick. So now that just created our light blue to purple. You can see our start point we started with was the light blue that's right here. The end point that we selected is that same purple you see on that color picker up here. So I'm going to click Control Z to undo that. This next one up here, it's called the radial gradient. We click that. We'll see our start point we select. This start point will be the color blue, and our end point will be the color purple, as you saw with the linear gradient. Now this one creates this circle pattern instead of just the sort of left to right gradient we saw before. The linear one direction gradient we saw. This one creates a radial circle with those same 2 colors. So I'm going to again Control Z and undo that. This one here is called the angle gradient. This one we select our start and end point again, and it will create sort of that gradient along this angle here that we selected. I don't get too much use out of this one, but it has its uses. Not my favorite. Here we have the next one. This is called the reflected gradient, and we'll do the same thing, start and end point. And this one behaves similar to the linear gradient, but it mirrors it at a 90-degree angle to whatever the line is you draw. So if we draw a vertical line here, we'll see it having that reflected gradient, that reflected linear gradient going up and down instead of left and right. We'll undo those 2. And the last one up here is the diamond gradient. And this is similar to the radial gradient, but it creates a diamond shape instead. We'll undo that one as well. So now let's take a look at this color picker up here, because you probably won't want to use blue and purple for everything you do. The first color here we see, it says color stop. If you mouse over it, we're going to click on that color. Click on the color down here. And let's say we want it to go from light green to dark green. So we'll select that green here, and we'll create a nice sort of pale light green. Okay. We'll select the purple here because we don't want that purple, we want a dark green. So we'll click on that color again. Go to green, and then we'll bring it down to a darker green. Maybe around here, that looks That looks nice. And you can see the real-time changes in your gradient here. It's a little preview of it. So instead, if we wanted to go to black, you can see that light green to black. Let's bring it back up to a dark green. Click OK to confirm that selection. We'll click OK here. And then let's go back up here to the top and select our linear gradient. So now we'll do our start point and our end point. And there we can see that light green that we created for our first color, the dark green for our second color, is our start point and end point of this gradient. I'm going to click Control Z to undo that. If we click on the top box again, the radial gradient, you'll see our start point, our end point. Is now we have that light green to the dark green. We have that nice gradient going from one color to the next. And now another use for gradients is if we create a shape. So we have our shape tools down here. We'll just create a rectangle for this. So we'll click on that tool down there, that'll create the shape tool. So typically if I were to create a shape, you'll see we have our fill and we have our stroke. So I'll increase the stroke size here. And then I'll change the stroke color to, let's do that same dark green. So you can see our shape here with that fill is the color you see here. Stroke is the color you see there. But if we wanted a gradient inside this shape instead of just a regular fill, we can do that. It's a very similar process to the gradient tool we just used. So we'll click on fill. And then up here at the top, there's a button here that's no fill. There's a button here just for a solid color. And this is the one we want here. This is our gradient fill. We also have this one over here for a pattern. That's, if you have any images here, you can select patterns like this. But that is not what we're working on today. So let's go back to the gradient fill. So here, this gradient we see at the bottom is very similar to the gradient tool we were just using. And to change this gradient, it's a little different. So you have this box, you just need to double click on that box. It'll bring up the color picker again. Now let's say we want a similar light green to dark green. So we can select our first color here. Okay. We can select our next color here. Double click on that one and create a dark green. Now with how I created this rectangle here, it flipped the gradient on me. There's this button here. You can click this just to reverse the colors of the gradient anytime. And then there, now we have our shape that has that gradient fill. And let's say we want to get rid of the stroke on that one. So we'll click on that stroke there. Click on the no fill button there for the stroke. And now we just have our shape. It's just the. So that's pretty much the basics on the gradient tool in Photoshop. If you want to just create a shape with a gradient, you'll go to that shape tool first, and then under that fill, you will create the gradient with this tool here, and you just got to double click on the colors. If you're not trying to work on just a shape and you just want to create a gradient fill for the screen, I'll create another new layer down here. Then you will click on the gradient tool here. You'll select your colors up there. Again, let's go to a linear gradient, and I'm going to turn off that rectangle for now so it's not bothering us. And the start and end point, that's our linear gradient. One other quick tool that might be handy is if you only want to create a gradient on a certain portion of the screen, we can go to our selection tool here. Let's just say we want to use the rectangular marquee tool. And if we just highlight only the bottom half, only the bottom half of our screen right here of our canvas, that'll be the only area on the canvas that we're going to be actively changing. So then we'll go back to our gradient tool. We will select our start and end point there. And now you'll see that same gradient, but it's only affecting that area within the selection we made. So it's only in that box at the bottom of the screen. You can click Control D to deselect that. And then we'll just Control Z a couple times to undo. So let's try one more time. We'll select our elliptical marquee tool. Now we're selecting a circle. So now again, this gradient will only affect what's inside that selection you made. So going back to the gradient tool, our start and end point, and there you see it. I'm going to Control D to deselect that. And that is the basics on the gradient tool. Hope this helped you out.